Hey, thanks for checking out The Solid Verbal. Now would be a great time to subscribe to the channel for college football content all off season long.
Welcome back to The Solid Verbal, boys and girls. My name is Ty Hildenbrand, joining me as always over there in the heart of the Midwest, the epicenter of the latest college football news stories to drop just moments ago. Dan Rubenstein, sir, how are you, my friend?
I'm all right. It's been a weirdly busy day and days hyper locally in the college football universe. We're doing this show about Pat Fitzgerald and the tenure and the allegations and the hazing and the discipline. And as per usual, Ty, I'm going to do the podcaster's lament. Can I do that?
You can, please.
The podcaster's lament is, I think we recorded a very high quality show with Rodger Sherman, who, of course, went to Northwestern, worked at and edited the sports section of the Daily Northwestern, is a longtime Northwestern football diehard. And so we wanted his very specific and unique insight into Northwestern football and Pat Fitzgerald and the program at large. And we recorded that about, 3 hours ago, and it was all set to go. And then we got news that Pat Fitzgerald, I saw via Pete Thamel at ESPN is who I saw it from.
That's right.
That Pat Fitzgerald has been let go by Northwestern.
Yeah, officially official. As Dan mentioned, we had speculated on the show that we recorded a little bit earlier today that it would probably go down around 6:45 Eastern time on Monday, July the 10th, a few hours after we hit stop. Indeed, Pat Fitzgerald was dismissed as football coach for the Northwestern Wildcats. So the conversation that follows will be, I think, some context from Rodger in what he knows about being close to the Northwestern football program and athletics program at large. It is all interesting context given the state of affairs, given where we're at right now. Pat Fitzgerald, his career record at Northwestern, finishing out at 110 and 101. His first season with the Wildcats as a coach was back in 2006. One of the things you'll hear us highlight a little bit with Rodger is just how much Pat Fitzgerald meant to the Northwestern football family, the Northwestern athletics program.
Yeah.
For all intents and purposes, he was the program, not just the face of it, but sort of the embodiment of everything it was supposed to stand for.
Right.
And obviously, under the weight of these recent allegations, did he know? Did he not know? With respect
Could he
to,
have known? Yeah.
Could he have known? I mean, there's just so many thoughts and so many questions that have swirled since this news became public. It became rather apparent here, at least when we started having our discussion earlier, and to be honest, hours before that, that this was not something he could survive. It was just a very toxic situation, and Northwestern needed to move on. They've chosen to do so after we hit the stop button.
Yeah.
I'm sure they did not have us in mind. They had the safety of their program and their players in mind.
Yeah.
When
Story
they made
definitely
that
not about us and about people reporting it and reacting to it.
One of the things that you said on our conversation here that is to follow is just living around the area, which you do, the deep reverence that people have for the Northwestern football program. We tend to think of it on a national level in terms of like, hey, they were 1-11 last year. They were 3-9 the year prior. They were 3-9 in 2019. This hasn't really been that good of a football team. And that's the lens through which most people see it.
Yeah.
But locally, that is not the case. Locally, this is like a thing.
Yeah, people love Northwestern and people have emotions about Northwestern. Rodger mentioned the project to fully overhaul Ryan Field, and a lot of like signs in front yards that are supporting it or think it's going to, ruin the world. All sorts of emotions running high, but just very locally. The fascinating thing is that this is a weird program. This is a program in which literally one person has been able to kind of sort of sustain success. If you look at where they were between like 2012 and 2018, and then they give Ohio State everything they can handle in the 2020 Big Ten championship game. And so there's this ongoing conversation about, is it like a good year or bad year Northwestern? And it seemed to alternate, but there was the rock solid presence of Pat Fitzgerald through it all. And, through his time as a player and as a coach, it was maybe the only school in the country where, results be damned, he can coach there as long as he wants. Like, Nick Saban can win a ton of games at Alabama, but if it goes to like 8-4, 9-3 territory for 2-3 straight years, he might be gone. You could obviously not say that with Northwestern fully defeated on American soil last season.
Yeah,
So
I do think that we see scandals like this from time to time in college football where the coach is revered by the community,
sure.
revered by the program, the alumni base, the money men and women. And these decisions are very, very difficult, especially in times of scandal. And I do credit Northwestern for moving quickly to resolve the matter after it became apparent that their initial punishment, the 2-week unpaid suspension that they handed down on Friday, was not going to
Yeah.
be tenable. Not after the Daily Northwestern report, the student newspaper, mind you, that came forward with explosive allegations that I think spelled out for the general public in a little bit more detail what type of hazing incidents we were talking about here, ones
Sure.
that rose to the level of sexual abuse, which is really, truly disturbing to see and
Yeah.
read and hear. You feel bad for anybody that had to experience that. And it almost minimizes it to some extent that we talk about it just from a football standpoint. But
Yeah.
with that as sort of the backdrop and the great reporting from the student newspaper, the university president, Michael Schill, was left no choice. He did issue a statement on Saturday saying that he was going to reassess, said that he had erred in his decision to only give a 2-week suspension without pay, and that he was going to consult with others, the board of trustees, et cetera, to see if there was a different course of action. He obviously moved pretty swiftly between Saturday night and now
Yep.
this being Monday evening
Mm-hmm.
to dismiss the coach and move forward. It's still very early as we're recording this, Dan. We don't know who the interim will be. There's a lot of unanswered questions. My hunch is that we won't have those for a bit here, and we'll do our best on the show to try and cover that as best we can. It's not often we have these types of discussions in early July.
No.
It's just July has been a very, very interesting period over college football for the last, I don't know, 3 years now. Just the unexpected news stories that sneak up on us, and this just happens to be the latest of them.
Yeah, and I honestly I don't think it was that difficult a decision, which I don't think you were alluding to. It didn't
No.
seem like
Oh,
it was
no.
that difficult a decision given like if A, well, you kind of have to get rid of him. If B, you kind of have to get rid of him. If C, which is a combination of A and B, you kind of have to get rid of him, right? Whether he knew, whether he didn't know, whether he should have known. You're now entering a period of obviously you don't glaze over the fact that like, yeah, this is a horrible thing allegedly that was happening within his program that was corroborated and investigated and everything, right? But also it's the kind of thing that like times have long ago changed where this is obviously this information is going to get out.
Yeah.
Like there had to have been opportunities if we had staffers, right? Staffers were in the know reportedly, right? If we're going to trust all this reporting, we have no reason not to. If staffers knew, if former players knew, current players, older players going back to 2007, it almost seems nearly impossible that Pat Fitzgerald took the tact of like, up, let me stop you right there. La, 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 la. Fingers are in my ears, right? That seems impossible. Coupled with the fact that, and look, this is not why it happened. It happened because it had to be done. But what's today's date? The 10th of July?
Yeah.
We are in the literal, maybe not literal, we are in the figurative, slowest part of the sports calendar. This is the only story happening. The lights couldn't be brighter on Northwestern in this moment, right? Isn't this like the time of year? I think there's NBA Summer League, maybe the MLB All-Star Game, whatever.
Yeah.
And so
this is not a news dump, is what you're saying.
it's not a news dump. It's not a like, should we, shouldn't we? It's there was obviously pressure and there's eyeballs on this situation in a way that perhaps there wouldn't be. But if this were happening in March, if this were happening in October, it also seemed like it'd be a no-brainer. But it just seems especially so now, given the attention on the program. And there was no clear path forward. Like how if you're Pat Fitzgerald, how do you recruit to Northwestern? How do you, if you're a Northwestern administrator, if you're a parent of a current Northwestern player or a prospective player, how do you square everything that has been investigated and corroborated within the program? It seems just impossible.
If you're a booster,
yeah,
funding the operation,
sure,
wanting to help pay for renovations, wanting to help take Northwestern to the next level.
You don't want to be associated with it. Yeah.
People don't want to be associated with toxic brands.
No,
they just don't. And I hate to sort of minimize the situation by making it in terms of money, but
this is like a sub reason you're talking. Yeah.
Yeah. But this is where we're at with college football.
Totally.
And this is how decisions are normally made. in other
Mhm.
situations that aren't quite as explosive, when the money dries up, suddenly there's a problem in a hurry.
Yeah.
And especially for things like this, kudos to Northwestern for recognizing quickly that there was going to be a problem here and that, they needed to correct things and making the move, because it wouldn't have been a tenable situation to keep Fitz, for as revered as I'm sure he still is to
Yeah.
a large extent in the Northwestern family. It just wasn't going to work moving forward. There's no way you couldn't do it.
It's a fascinating situation moving forward as well, because this is not an incredible job in and of itself, but because you're in the Big Ten, because of the money involved, because of the access both in the Midwest and the fact that you can and have to recruit nationally based on some of the academic qualifications that you need to play for Northwestern. It's interesting. We've seen schools with this type of academic background succeed. It's more difficult to succeed at a place like Northwestern, I would say, than other places, but there are certainly appeal points. And it's also fascinating to see, is Pat Fitzgerald just done as a football coach forever? Is this it? We're just not going to hear from him? I tend to think if he wants to coach, if this is something that he feels like he needs to do as a person, and perhaps does self-reflection, perhaps, goes on some sort of, not apology tour, but, sort of builds more goodwill after this is going on. DJ Durkin is a defensive coordinator at a major place right now.
That's right.
So doors are never fully closed, it seems, in this sport. I'm not sure what that actual line is, but yeah, DJ Durkin was the coordinator at both Ole Miss and now Texas A&M after overseeing something pretty awful and horrendous. Just listened to a podcast about it, actually. So I don't know, man. It's fascinating on a bunch of different levels, but wild that we're talking about a Northwestern program not coached by Pat Fitzgerald moving forward.
We're going to play back our conversation with Rodger to give you some context for all this and get his thoughts. We assumed, as you mentioned, Dan, when we recorded the interview earlier today, that this was going to happen. We didn't expect it this quickly. So bear that in mind. But I think some useful context from Rodger. We'll hop on at the end of the conversation, offer some final thoughts. Appreciate you being with us here. Hit subscribe, hit follow if you want more college football podcasting coverage throughout the course of the preseason, whatever we're in now in July. Make sure you follow along on socials and on YouTube. We'll catch you on the flip side of that Rodger conversation. Here he is.
We have ourselves a dear friend of the show and former sports editor of the Daily Northwestern, of course, the student-run newspaper, who broke a huge part of this Pat Fitzgerald and hazing story from theringer.com. And he's covered the NFL. He's covered college football. He's covered sports of all kinds. He's covered news. Look at that. Look at that resume. Look at that CV. Rodger Sherman, how you doing?
I'm doing good. Yeah, the Daily Northwestern was the one who broke the story. I was the sports editor there. The funny thing about Northwestern football is, like, they really like it when, like, people go on TV and say, I went to Northwestern Journalism School.
Of course.
And I'm a big fan of the Northwestern team. But they don't like it so much when the people at the Northwestern Journalism School do reporting on things happening within Northwestern's football program. Real catch-22 there. Nice when Michael Wilbon or Mike Greenberg goes on TV and says, Northwestern is good, and I went there.
Right.
Not so much when the student paper reveals possibly decades of hazing and other not so great conduct in the program.
What was your reaction when you heard the news? And then have you been in any sort of communication? Obviously, it's been a minute since you graduated, so I don't expect you to have the most connected sources still at the student paper, but maybe you do. What was your reaction when you found out the story, and from an insider's perspective, just because you were there and did the thing, what's on your mind?
I don't have sources anymore, although what makes me a little bit sad and worried is, like, people have reported players as far back as, like, 2007, which is before I actually even got to school. And people have said that some of these activities have been going on for that long. So I guess I wasn't doing my job as the sports editor of the Daily Northwestern for not uncovering this at the time. They had revealed that there was an investigation going on a little while ago. And then on Friday, they announced the 2-week suspension. And I think as soon as the Daily broke that story on Saturday, it became clear that 2-week suspension wasn't going to hold up and wasn't enough. Just very, very upsetting on all fronts. You know, the thing about Northwestern football is like there is this sense of like that Pat Fitzgerald has instilled this idea that he does things the right way. That's his A, B, and C. That's his bread and butter. Good, clean American fun. He
Right.
brings people in. They are, you know, smart, and they go to class, and they do all these things that they sort of imply people at other places might not be as righteous and rigorous as we are.
Right.
And, I mean, obviously sometimes you like roll your eyes a little bit, but you don't really expect something quite this big of an, you know, an affront to that ideal, and this big of a letdown. You know, it's so counter to that premise that they've been selling for almost 2 decades at Northwestern.
So the timeline of the story, as you alluded to, is there was an announced investigation. Pat Fitzgerald was then disciplined, a 2-week unpaid suspension. And since then, there's been a letter from, quote unquote, the entire football team.
Football team.
Which is to say that no names were attributed to said letter. And then it came out that it arrived via a phone number from a former player.
Yeah.
And who said that the thoughts and the spirit of the letter came from a Zoom call with some members of the team. And obviously it was a very strange read because, and I'm paraphrasing, please do correct me, Ty or Rodger, if I have this wrong, that things were exaggerated or twisted and didn't happen and are outright fabricated lies. And also, if they did happen, Pat Fitzgerald didn't know about them, which is very confusing. And maybe I'm just not that bright, but that seems kind of backwards, yes?
Yeah, and the only other thing that I would add, Dan, is I think portion of the story, certainly the most damning portion of the story, and what I think the university president now is at least implying he's going to try to get to the bottom of, is whether or not Pat Fitzgerald knew. And he acknowledged, the university president did in his statement that went out late on Saturday night, that in handing out this 2-week unpaid suspension to Fitzgerald, he maybe did not take into account whether or not Fitzgerald should have known, right? The results of the investigation were such that it was widespread knowledge among players that there was something going on, right? Whatever that was, I suppose that's open to interpretation here if you believe any of these letters that have been passed around. But by and large, did Fitzgerald know? Should he have known, given the circumstances and how it seems all the other players did as well? That's really what the crux of this comes down to, where I think the story goes next, Rodger, if I'm accurate.
Yeah, and some of the recent reports, there was a report from Wildcat Report, which is a website that has covers like Northwestern recruiting and stuff. They said former staffers were aware of this happening. There have been reports from Inside NU, which is a team site run by Northwestern students, that players came forth that have been there since the beginning of Fitzgerald's tenure that knew about this. And it's one thing if it's like, oh, this is something that developed in the last year, and Fitz somehow didn't know it was going on, but it really strains belief, the idea that someone could be a coach for close to 2 decades and not have any idea that this is going on in their program. If those reports that people have been doing this since 2006 and 2007 are accurate, there's pretty much no way that the head coach couldn't know, and if they didn't know, that's damning in its own right. And that's something that's come up in past college sports scandals, like not knowing doesn't necessarily absolve the head coach of responsibility. And I mean, we alluded to that letter, which a lot of people around the program have sprung up to say Coach Fitzgerald didn't know, and he's such a high caliber guy. And, you know, there's this thought in the back of my head, like, if this letter is coming from quote unquote the entire team, and they're saying, there was no hazing / Pat Fitzgerald didn't know about the hazing. Hypothetically, these are the people who were involved in, some of the people were hypothetically involved in doing the hazing, and still often seem more interested in absolving Pat Fitzgerald of responsibility for it than than themselves. There's some wagon circling around there on Fitz, because it feels like he is, in a way that very few people in college sports are, he's responsible for so much of Northwestern's historic all-time success.
He is the program.
He is the program. He is the greatest player the program has ever had, the greatest coach the program has had. He has twice as many wins as anybody else. Since he took over, Northwestern's other sports have received increased funding and success. That's not all on him. Obviously, it's on the coaches of those teams too. But everything about the program has changed since he started to be there. And I got the sense they just obviously wanted it to, go away. And it became clear on Saturday that it's not going to.
Yeah, I mean,
go for it, Ty.
The findings in the report, and I'm paraphrasing here based on how The Athletic summed it up, the findings were that significant opportunities existed to discover the hazing, which in layman's terms means you didn't really look. You could have figured it out, but you didn't care to look to figure out if something like this was going on. In addition to the 2-week suspension without pay, which to my understanding occurred already or is in the process of occurring during a dead period, right? As someone pointed out, it's the equivalent of getting an unpaid vacation. There were some other things that were instituted at Northwestern to try and change the culture of the football program, i.e. no more practices at an offsite location, Camp Kenosha, where some of this stuff is said to have occurred, installing a locker room monitor that doesn't have to report to coaches, an online reporting tool, anti-hazing training, things that are important in their own right, but don't necessarily address if the coach knew or chose not to know, how do you fix that? So as you now, the former, I guess, sports editor of the Daily Northwestern, when you look at this chronology of events, okay, we find out about these actions that are being taken against the coach, against the program to try and change the culture. The report drops. Suddenly, the university president has a change of heart. Is he having that change of heart if not for the Daily Northwestern report? Is there something else here, an external factor that we don't know about, or was it just that intrepid reporting that led to this?
The thing the story with the president, it seems he was hired last year. This is his first year on the
Oregon.
job. From Go Ducks. And he was actually the second choice. They hired Wisconsin's president, and she had health issues and had to decline the job and passed away, sadly. And they hired Michael Schill kind of very quickly. I think less than a month went into the search, and he comes in, and Pat Fitzgerald is the most famous person at the school. He is their biggest fundraiser. He is so ingrained with the program that I don't even know how they would hire a next person. They have not been involved in the coaching carousel since the 20th century.
Yeah.
You don't know what the program would look like in that case. And I get the sense he comes on the job and is not interested in making a decision on Pat Fitzgerald in his first year as president. I'm not taking that on. Unpaid 2-week suspensions. We'll hope that this goes away. And then, Northwestern kids did reporting. And I really do think, I think it might have come out eventually. But yeah, to see it happen within a day and to see that change of heart within a day, likely came from the reporting. And don't really know how they can, keep Pat Fitzgerald at this point, which is such a strange thing to say, because like I said, there hasn't been anyone else for Northwestern football or Northwestern athletics in a very long time.
Yeah, I mean, the university president cited a conversation that he had with one of the complainants and said that he was so moved, and maybe that was part of the reason why he was having a change of heart with respect to the penalties here. However, the timing is a little suspect given the reporting that went on and when it dropped, and the report obviously got a fair amount of traction, not just in the college football world, but broader media as a whole.
And the past 2 days have been somewhat of like a flood of other people coming forth with other allegations. Just now, I haven't fully read it on my phone. There was another daily article about how 3 players on the team not only confirmed some of the things from the story, but also alleged that there was a racist culture or racist environment within the program. So it also feels like the longer Pat Fitzgerald is the coach, the more it feels like every hour I see something new.
Yeah.
Right.
On my phone that happened under his watch. And again, it all comes back to the idea that Pat Fitzgerald has fostered, that he is sort of this benevolent guardian of this entire program, and in some ways the school, that and the idea that anything like this could happen is, I think, damning whether he knew about it or not, and it's becoming increasingly unlikely that he didn't know about it.
It has the feel really of, and I hadn't thought about it in this through this lens until this story, but like of the long tenured, legendary, like almost like a college basketball coach, right? Like a Coach K or a Jim Boeheim or a Bobby Knight, that like there's this idea that they are bigger than the school. They have brought so much attention to the school that, like we said, they are the school. I'm gonna use the phrase talk about in a more refined way. Can you speak to? Isn't that better? Isn't that a better journalistic way to say talk about? Can you speak to the actual?
They teach us that.
Yeah, I'm sure they do at the beautiful Medill School of Journalism. Can you speak to the power structure at Northwestern? You mentioned a new president. It's also a relatively new athletic director, with the longtime athletic director leaving to become the commissioner of the ACC not terribly long ago. And this is something that you can correct me on if I'm wrong. There's like a money guy behind the scenes and family. And I assume it's not like whatever the Ryan family says goes, but like my assumption is Pat Fitzgerald and the Ryan family are very tight, or else perhaps a coach who has gone 1-8 in the Big Ten 3 of the last 4 years might not still be coaching.
Yeah, it's so there's a new athletic director within the last few years, and there's actually sort of a backstory there where he was named in a race. Sorry, he wasn't. Northwestern previously had promoted someone, Mike Poliski, to be the athletic director, and he was named in a lawsuit about racial discrimination in the cheerleading program.
Right.
And there was a similar thing where a lot of Northwestern student athletes endorsed him becoming the athletic director and holding on to that job. But ultimately he stepped down because there was so much pressure around the program. So that's somewhat informative for this moment right now, because it seems like there is the ability to change decisions if people are loud enough and angry enough about something that's happening.
Right.
And yes, so new athletic director, new president. There is a notable billionaire, Pat Ryan, after whom the football stadium Ryan Field is named after, the basketball stadium Welsh Ryan Arena is named after, the football practice facility Ryan Fieldhouse is named after him. He's very rich, and he has devoted almost his entire well, no, that's not true. He also gives billions of dollars to other stuff, but he's devoted far too much money to Northwestern athletics. I personally would have given less.
Yeah.
And they are renovating the stadium. It's going to cost $800 million, and a lot of that is done by Pat Ryan and with Pat Fitzgerald, sort of as the face of this. All of these new facilities and new programs, they have a beautiful new, like, sparkling football thing on Lake Michigan.
On Lake Michigan,
It's incredible. And all of this has sort of happened in this Pat Fitzgerald era, and with a billionaire donating large sums of money to it. I don't think he's the type of booster who, like, gets involved in the nitty-gritty of coaching hirings and firings, which would be fun. I would enjoy one of those.
Certainly.
But it's really hard to undersell how many, like, people associated with the program, not just the one billionaire, people who have gone to Northwestern in the past feel that Pat Fitzgerald is, like, sort of the best of Northwestern. Like, he's a lifer there. He embodies so many of these things that we talk about. And I think we've seen that with, like, a sort of wellspring of people jumping up to defend him first and foremost, over, this increasing cascade of, like, allegations that
right.
things happened within his program. And I just keep thinking about how that happens so often when there's one of these college sports scandals. You'll see people say, this could never happen. This is such a good guy.
Right.
And it almost amazes me because, like, in the end, that always seems like the most damning thing about the program,
Right.
Like, the way that people blindly rush to support someone who's brought them athletic joy, and then you look at it in the past tense, having found out about what happened at a school, and it kind of reveals this culture where one person's way of doing things became more important than everything else that people supposedly cared about. And I've just been weighing that in my head, like, over these past few days, seeing so many people rush to state their opinion on something, and then the facts just keep coming out and the reports just keep coming out, and it becomes increasingly hard to justify that sort of
like unwavering support.
Yeah, like that childlike heroism that a lot
right.
of people around Northwestern have had towards Pat Fitzgerald for so long.
What is the split like right now? Obviously, this is not a one size fits all, and every Northwestern fan feels the same way. But because he has been the program, you can understand why a ton of fans would say, like, wait, let's hear him out. He's done so much for the program. Like, why would he, allow such a thing to happen? Whereas a lot more Northwestern fans, it seems, have read the pieces and said, like, he either knew and it's awful, or either didn't know and that's awful in its own way. What has been the general tenor of the fan base, especially, and then please take as long as you need, especially because we're not talking about a winning program. We're not talking about a program where you can say, look, sometimes bad things happen, but things are good. We're winning. Like, we can't mess this up. What has the general mood been?
Yeah, I mean, I think more people are definitely on the let's get rid of this guy wagon at this point. I might be closed off and following, like, a particularly online and already had bad opinions about Northwestern football group. I almost wonder if the reason we're hearing about this now is because, like, for a solid 15 years, Northwestern wasn't having down periods like this.
Right.
We and now we're hearing these stories from people who were playing 15 years ago and saying this happened then. And yeah, like, Northwestern went on an unprecedented run of success while Pat Fitzgerald was playing, and then another one shortly after he became coach, and they were in Big Ten championship games. And definitely it helps The fact that they've had back-to-back losing seasons and they went 1-11 last year, when like it made it definitely, honestly, it made it a little bit easier in my head to justify like moving on with this person, and I'm trying to reckon with that,
Of course.
in my head, because like it's not something that should be a factor at all.
Right.
Obviously, but I think that comes to mind, and it also feels like it's evidence that whatever Pat Fitzgerald's supposed culture brings to the program just hasn't been clicking.
Right.
It's just not. It's not convincing good players to come to the team, and you hate to get like so pragmatic with it, but I think Pat Fitzgerald, his credibility, even if he survived this hypothetically, would be forever shot. And I don't think parents would send their kids to this program. This is a guy, again, who says, send your kids to my program. They'll have good, clean American fun.
Right.
It's a 40-year decision, not a 4-year decision, is one of his favorites. Like, you're going here because it will set you up for life and you're going to do things the right way. And all of that rings incredibly hollow when confronted with the idea that either he knew about hazing and kept his mouth shut, or that he doesn't know enough about his own program to identify that hazing is going on.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, yeah, go ahead, Rodger. I'm sorry.
It's just the Pat Fitzgerald ethos just does not stand up with like this. You can't believe the other stuff he says if this is going. I mean, that's obviously a pretty like basic statement, but like you can't buy into his cult of personality in a world where this is happening.
Well, what makes it difficult, especially if you, as you said, follow along online, you've got sort of two camps, right? There's one camp that's going to look at what the investigation brought forward, which was that they couldn't find sufficient evidence that Fitzgerald knew about the hazing. And I think there's some people that are going to cling to that, and they say, well, this isn't fair for this guy to go down with the ship if, in fact, he didn't know, if, in fact, he wants to do better, if, in fact, he wants to change the culture. But as with all of these scandals, or at least with most of them that we've seen, as you mentioned, Rodger, at some point, it just becomes too big a distraction to be associated with the program, especially in a sport like college football that is so driven by money and boosters and fundraising and all these external forces that have their hand in a program. On some level, if none of those folks want to be associated with the guy at the top, whether he knew or not, that's the ball game. That's sort of where we're getting to, I feel like, with this story. And so whether it's right or not, I think we're probably getting there with Fitzgerald, where it's time to start looking elsewhere. Like maybe this is a negotiation period to try and figure out how to equally break ties and then go in a much different direction. I don't know if you've given thought to what that next direction could look like should we get there, but would you agree that it feels like that is fast approaching?
It feels untenable. It just, I don't feel like the things that Pat Fitzgerald has been good at, even in his time as a Northwestern, even if you're just looking at it totally pragmatically, the things that he has been good at, he can't be good at anymore.
No.
In a world where this hazing scandal is something that happened under his watch, whether he knew about it or not. And it's a hard thing for a university to do, like get rid of the only coach that your program has ever been successful with. But they have to be working through those kinks right now. They have to be figuring out what's next. Ultimately, it's a football coach, and I think they will have a football program, and like they will hire someone else, and it's something the school has never done. But you're also sort of starting to think that the way they've been doing things for a good amount of time hasn't been perfect either, because we're seeing all these issues that came up while doing things the Northwestern way.
It should be pointed out, by the way, that just in terms of the on-field results, and I don't argue with you that Pat Fitzgerald's the best coach they've ever had. Obviously, the number of wins and the tenure it sort of speaks for itself. But part of what has happened on the field seems to be a direct result of a specific assistant coach leaving the program. That the Northwestern defense was the side of the ball that always held things up, and Pat Fitzgerald, for as whatever his reputation was or has been or maybe continues to be to some, he hadn't figured out offense in about a dozen years. Like, it's been 12 years of Northwestern not fielding a competitive offense, essentially, since like 2011, I want to say. I don't know if that was Kane Coulter or Dan Persa way back then. And so it's been a lot of, sub 60 nationally all the way down to like 127th offenses, which speaks to he has just been given a pass, football term. He has been given a pass to get into bowls and have that be good enough, and perhaps that is good enough for Northwestern, but it also begs the question, where would Northwestern hypothetically go from here if and when they're hiring somebody new? What is that standard?
It's literally something they have not thought about since hiring Randy Walker in the 1990s. The chronology here is Northwestern was never good until Pat Fitzgerald was a player. That was under Gary Barnett. He goes to Colorado. They hire Randy Walker. Randy Walker dies in the offseason in 2005. And they don't do a coaching search. They promote Pat Fitzgerald as the guy who was the face of the program as a player, and they're hoping they could unite around him again as a coach. And it happened. And they won more games than they'd ever. I mean, this guy was the winningest coach in Northwestern history by the time he was 40 years old, which is
it's wild.
Before most people get their chance to be a head coach at all. And that definitely made him there's like a feel that he was a lifetime hire by the time I left the school over a decade ago.
Right.
And I think that has led itself to a period of stagnation, because it seems like there are no real consequences for losses, for it seems like there are no consequences for losses. And right now it seems like this program was going to give him no consequences for a hazing scandal, like a widespread hazing scandal, corroborated by an independent investigation. They were going to give him 2 weeks of suspension. So at a time, after a certain amount of time, he became bigger than everything else at Northwestern. And in some ways, the results compared to history justify that.
Right.
Northwestern's just in such a strange place where they were forgotten for decades. Like, historically, probably should not have been in the Big Ten Conference, but they are, and they started picking up around the time cash in college football became huge. And they're now in the most profitable conference. They're making huge amounts of money every year. And it's sort of feels like Pat Fitzgerald has justified that because he's like won games instead of losing 34 in a row, which is something that Northwestern very much did do at one point in time. They lost 34 football games in a row, which is really impressive when you think about it.
It's very difficult to do. Yeah.
Yeah. So it might be 32. I'll need to look that up.
Okay.
Over 30.
Right.
Not good. And it was sort of this catch-22 that developed with him where he represented this new era of not accepting being bad at football. Like that was sort of what his face meant to so many people. But at the same time, we were asked to accept them being bad at football when they go 3-9 and 1-11 and nothing happens. So those two things grew together, and I mean, now I guess we're seeing what else people were being asked to tolerate, and it's a lot worse than losing football games.
Yeah, and it's one of those things, and you've seen the video where he talks about the program not tolerating hazing from way back when, and you think about certain things that, look, I'm going to use the word meathead, which is not appropriate, and it's a term in football that's loaded, whatever. But you remember when, I forget who they lost to, when he said, "I don't care what people on Twitter have to say. You can email me. My email address is #IDon'tCare," stuff like that. Where you're like, man, he is just almost a caricature at times. And like for a school that, the bright academic reputation that Northwestern has, it almost like weirdly doesn't square at times. I don't know where I'm going with this. I'm just sort of thinking out loud, but like, did he have that reputation of being the like old school guy with the big shoulder pads at this place that is not known for having that kind of history? Has that always been the reputation where he's just
for sure.
Okay.
Oh, for sure. Like, I mean, he would like make fun of the concept of like statistics and numbers and analytics.
Right.
What did he call complete pure communism? I think the RPO. I think he called the RPO communism.
Yes.
And it is strange to bring that like vibe into a school that's famously nerdy.
Right.
And he was also he is the only person who could really pull that off, that like gimmick where he's simultaneously like, you got to go to class, and also I don't think numbers are real, and like it's a thin line he walked, and it's one that so few people ever associated with Northwestern could pull off credibly. And it's definitely like, I think some part of me wants to say it's unsurprising that he would look the other way at things like this. Whenever he's had a chance to, he famously was involved in Northwestern not having a union when the players tried to unionize in 2014. He was strongly against that, and came out to say it. Some people said he was union busting. It's like he does have that reputation and that vibe of like wanting things to be the way they've always been. And when you hear about something like this potentially going on for his entire tenure and him not saying about it, that persona of like trying to keep things the way they've always been, it does sort of jibe with that.
Fair enough. Rodger Sherman, The Ringer, Daily Northwestern, thank you so much for your insight and your time. And hopefully this ends in a sensical way, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing good that can come out of it. My first reaction was like, they should fire this person. His football team has not been good. These are awful things to have overseen.
Right.
But it's not like this makes me happy.
Right.
It's not like I would feel better about everything if Pat Fitzgerald isn't there. No. It's not like I'll be more excited for the 2023 season opener against Rutgers. It's just like it's what has to be done, because you can't support a program that abides this.
Agree. Thank you very much for all of your time, and hope to talk soon.
Thanks, Rodger.
Support student journalists.